I'm Selena Ivora, and I'm 24 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed that unconditional love could heal any wound between a mother and daughter. Then my mother's heart attack changed everything. I emptied my entire savings account, $28,000, to pay for her emergency surgery without hesitation. The surgery saved her life, but it destroyed something in me. My mother's words still echo in my mind. You only did this to feel superior, to make yourself look like some kind of martyr. What she didn't know is that I had been sending her grocery money for 2 years, quietly covering her utility bills when she couldn't make ends meet. What they didn't know was how desperately I had hoped this moment would finally bring us together. But how do you heal a relationship with someone who sees your greatest act of love as manipulation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was debugging code for a client's website. My phone buzzed against my desk in the cramped studio apartment I shared with my roommate Gia in Sacramento. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the way it rang, insistent, urgent, made me answer immediately. Is this Selena Ivora? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Dr. Moira Cladis from UC Davis Medical Center. Your mother, Callista Ivora, has been admitted with a severe myocardial infarction. We need to speak with family immediately. The words hit me like cold water. My mother, heart, attack, family. 3 concepts that shouldn't have belonged in the same sentence, considering we hadn't spoken in 8 months. Our last conversation had ended with her hanging up on me after I'd suggested she see a therapist about her chronic anxiety. I started, then stopped. The question felt too big, too loaded with 9 years of complicated history. She's stable for now, but she needs emergency surgery. A triple bypass. Without it, another episode could be fatal. Are you able to come in? I looked around my tiny apartment at the secondhand furniture Zia and I have cobbled together, at my laptop surrounded by empty coffee cups and sticky notes. This was my world now, clean, quiet, predictable. A world I built deliberately, far from the chaos of my childhood home. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Sacramento in late September was still warm. The sky, that particular shade of blue that reminded me why I'd stayed in California despite everything. I gripped the steering wheel of my 10-year-old Honda and tried to prepare myself for seeing her again. Callista Ivora, my mother, the woman who had raised me with a peculiar combination of fierce protection and calculated cruelty. She was 53. Now, though she looked older, years of smoking and stress had carved lines around her eyes that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide. She'd been beautiful once, in that sharp-edged way that made people pay attention. Now she wielded that beauty like a weapon that had grown dull with overuse. The last time I'd seen her was at Christmas dinner at my Aunt Fiamma's house. She'd spent the entire evening cataloging her various ailments, her back pain, her insomnia, her mounting medical bills, while poignantly avoiding eye contact with me. When I offered to help with her insurance paperwork, she'd waved me off with that particular gesture she perfected, dismissive, martyred, designed to make me feel both rejected and guilty. I don't need charity, she'd said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, especially not from someone who thinks throwing money around solves everything. The comment had stung because it was so unfair. I'd been quietly helping her for years, small amounts transferred to her account when I noticed her electricity bill was overdue, grocery deliveries that I'd arranged through mutual friends. I'd never asked for credit or acknowledgement. I'd simply done what felt necessary. But that was Callista. She had a talent for reframing kindness as condescension, for turning generosity into guilt. It was a skill she'd honed during my childhood, and one that had driven my older brother Cairo to move 3 states away the moment he turned 18. Now, pulling into the hospital parking lot, I wondered if this crisis might change things between us. Maybe facing mortality would soften her edges, help her see that my attempts to care weren't attacks on her independence, but expressions of love. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and desperation. I found my way to the cardiac unit, my sneakers squeaking against the polished floors. Dr. Cladis was waiting for me, a woman in her late 30s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that probably saved lives daily. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed to be standard issue in hospitals everywhere. "Your mother's condition is serious but treatable. The blockages are severe. We're looking at a triple bypass surgery that needs to happen within the next 48 hours. What's the prognosis?" "Excellent, assuming the surgery goes well. But there are risks, as with any major cardiac procedure. And there's the matter of cost." Dr. Cladis consulted her tablet. "Your mother doesn't have insurance that covers the full procedure. We're looking at approximately $30,000 for the surgery and recovery." $30,000. I thought about my savings account, the money I'd been accumulating for a down payment on a house, for graduate school, for a future that suddenly seemed impossibly distant. "Can I see her?" Dr. Cladis led me through a maze of corridors to the cardiac ICU. My mother was awake but groggy, connected to monitors that beeped with mechanical regularity. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the hospital gown and the tangle of wires attached to her chest. "Celine." Her voice was hoarse. "I told them not to call you." "Mom." I pulled a chair close to her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying." She turned her head away from me. "Which I suppose I am." "The doctor says the surgery has a high success rate." "You're going to be fine." "Easy for you to say." "You're not the one lying here." She closed her eyes. "I suppose you heard about the money. I can help with that." Her eyes snapped open. "I don't want your help." "Mom, this isn't about pride. This is about keeping you alive. Everything is about pride when you don't have anything else left." I sat with her for an hour, making small talk about the weather, about her apartment complex, about anything that didn't touch on the chasm between us. When she finally fell asleep, I went back to Dr. Cladis's office. "I want to cover the surgery," I told her. Dr. Cladis looked surprised. "That's very generous, but it's a significant amount of money for someone your age. She's my mother." "Have you discussed this with her?" I thought about Callista's words, "I don't want your help," and realized that her pride was a luxury neither of us could afford right now. "She understand." That evening, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, staring at my online banking page. $28,000. Every dollar I'd saved from my freelance work, from the part-time job I'd held through college, from the careful budgeting I'd practiced since moving out at 15. Zia found me there at midnight, still staring at the screen. What's wrong? She was wearing her favorite pajamas, bright yellow with tiny tacos printed all over them. Zia had grown up in foster care and had developed a philosophy of surrounding herself with things that made her smile. It was one of the many reasons I loved living with her. I explained about my mother, about the surgery, about the money. "Jesus, Celine." Zia sat down beside me on our secondhand couch. "That's your entire savings." "I know. And you two barely speak." "I know. But you're going to do it anyway." "I have to." Zia was quiet for a long moment. She understood complicated family dynamics in a way that most people didn't. Her childhood had been a revolving door of temporary homes and temporary guardians, each one teaching her something different about love and abandonment. "Okay," she said finally. "But promise me something. Promise me you won't expect this to fix whatever's broken between you two. People don't change just because you save their life." I promised, but even as I said the words, I knew I was lying. Deep down, I was hoping that this grand gesture would finally prove to my mother that I loved her unconditionally. That maybe, for once, she would see my actions as an expression of care, rather than an attempt to control her the next morning. I called Dr. Cladis and arranged to transfer the funds. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday. I took the day off, work, and spent Wednesday evening with my mother, reading to her from a book of poetry she'd loved when I was a child. For those few hours, sitting in the sterile hospital room with the machines beeping softly in the background, I allowed myself to believe that everything between us might finally be different. The surgery took 6 hours. I spent most of that time in the family waiting area, a depressing space with fluorescent lighting and motivational posters about healing and hope. Aunt Fiona arrived around noon with a bag of homemade cookies and her particular brand of nervous energy. "She's going to be fine," Fiona said for the 10th time, patting my arm with fingers that smelled like vanilla extract. "Your mother is tough as nails. Remember when she had pneumonia that winter you were 12? Doctor said she should have been hospitalized, but she just drank hot tea with whiskey and refused to miss work." I remembered. I also remembered that she'd spent that entire winter making sure I knew how much my existence complicated her recovery. How having to take care of a child made everything harder. How my father's death had left her with burdens she'd never asked for. But I didn't say any of that to Fiona. My aunt meant well, but she had a talent for rewriting history to make it more palatable. In her version of events, Callista was a devoted single mother who had sacrificed everything for her children. The reality was more complicated. "Has Cairo been in touch?" I asked. Fiona's expression shifted slightly. "You know your brother. He's so busy with work. Cairo hadn't been in touch." I knew this because I called him myself the night before, leaving a voicemail that explained the situation and asked him to at least send a text to our mother. He hadn't responded. This was typical. Cairo had perfected the art of being unavailable. During family crises, Dr. Cladis appeared in the waiting room doorway at 4:17 p.m. I'd been watching the clock obsessively, calculating how much time had passed since they'd wheeled my mother into the operating room. "The surgery went very well," she said, and I felt something inside my chest unclench. All 3 blockages were successfully bypassed. She'll need to stay in the hospital for about a week, and then she have a long recovery period at home, but the prognosis is excellent. Fiona burst into tears of relief. I felt oddly detached, as if I were watching the scene from a distance. My mother was going to live. The money I'd spent had bought her more years, more opportunities to criticize my choices, more chances for used to hurt each other. When can I see her? She's in recovery now. Give it another hour or so, and then you can visit briefly. When I finally saw her, Callista looked fragile in a way that was almost shocking. The surgery had drained the color from her face, and the network of monitors made her seem smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like I've been hit by a truck." Her voice was weak but alert. "They said the surgery went well. Dr. Cladis says you'll make a full recovery." "Good." She closed her eyes. "I suppose I should thank you." "You don't need to thank me, Mom, for paying for it. The surgery..." She didn't look at me when she said it. "Fiona told me what you did. I felt a flush of irritation toward my aunt, who had apparently decided to share information I hadn't asked her to share. But I pushed the feeling down. I'm just glad you're okay. $28,000. She said the number like it tasted bitter. That was her house money, wasn't it? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. She finally opened her eyes and looked directly at me. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. I specifically told you I didn't want your help. Mom, you almost died. The money doesn't matter compared to that. Easy for you to say, you're 24. You have time to save. More money. She shifted in the bed, wincing. I'm 53. I don't have time to pay you back. I don't want you to pay me back. Of course you don't. That would spoil the gesture, wouldn't it? I stared at her, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. What do you mean? Nothing. I'm tired. She closed her eyes again. Thank you for paying for the surgery, Celine. I'll try to be appropriately grateful. The word appropriately hung in the air between us like a challenge. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but she'd already turned away from me, and a nurse was approaching to check her vitals. She needs rest, the nurse said gently. Maybe come back tomorrow? I drove home in a state of confused frustration. I'd expected gratitude, yes, but more than that. I'd expected some acknowledgement that what I'd done came from love, not from some desire to control or manipulate her. Instead, she'd managed to make my sacrifice feel selfish, calculated. Zia was waiting for me with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. How is she? Alive? Ungrateful? The usual. I slumped onto our couch and accepted the container of lo mein she handed me. She managed to make me feel guilty for saving her life. That's a special talent. She said she didn't want my help. Like, I should have just let her die to preserve her pride. Zia poured wine into 2 mismatched glasses. You know what I think? What? I think you did the right thing for the wrong reasons. I looked at her sharply. What's that supposed to mean? You didn't pay for that surgery because she needed it. You paid for it because you needed to prove something to yourself about what kind of daughter you are. That's not true. Isn't it? Zia's voice was gentle but relentless. You've been trying to earn her love your entire life, Celine. You send her money, you worry about her bills. You show up every time she needs something, even though she treats you like garbage. And deep down, you thought this would be the thing that finally made her see you differently. I wanted to argue, but the words felt hollow before I could speak them. Because Gia was right, at least partially. I'd hoped this would change something. Between my mother and me, I had imagined her seeing my sacrifice and finally understanding that I loved her unconditionally. So what if I did? I said finally. Is that so wrong? No, but it's not going to work. Your mother has spent 30 years perfecting the art of making you feel bad about caring about her. One grand gesture isn't going to change that. Maybe not, but I couldn't just let her die. No, you couldn't. Because you're a good person. But don't expect her to suddenly become one too just because you saved her life. I spent the next few days visiting my mother in the hospital, bringing her books and magazines, updating her on small neighborhood gossip that Fiona had shared with me. She was polite but distant, treating me like a helpful acquaintance rather than the daughter who had emptied her bank account to keep her alive on Saturday. A week after the surgery, I arrived to find her bed empty. For a moment, I panicked, thinking something had gone wrong. But the nurse at the desk assured me that Callista had been discharged that morning. Discharged? She didn't tell me she was leaving today. Her sister picked her up around 10 a.m. Is there a problem? No problem. But there was a problem. My mother had been released from the hospital and hadn't bothered to let me know. After everything I'd done, she'd chosen to call Fiona instead of me. I drove to her apartment complex, a rundown collection of buildings on the outskirts of Sacramento. Her unit was on the second floor, accessible by an external staircase that had seen better decades. I climbed the stairs carefully, carrying a bag of groceries I picked up on the way. When I knocked, it took several minutes for her to answer. She opened the door wearing an old bathrobe, looking tired but healthier than she had in the hospital. "Celine, what are you doing here?" "I went to the hospital to visit you." "They said you'd been discharged." "Yes, this morning." She didn't invite me in. Why didn't you call me? "I would have picked you up." Fiona was available. We stood there looking at each other across the threshold of her apartment. I could see past her into the living room, the same furniture I remembered from my childhood, arranged in the same configuration. Nothing had changed except that now I was on the outside looking in. "I brought you some groceries," I said, holding up the bag. "Thank you. You can leave them by the door." "Mom, are you angry with me about something?" She sighed, the sound heavy, with exhaustion and something else I couldn't identify. "I'm not angry, Celine. I'm just tired." "Tired of what?" "Of owing people things, of being in debt, of having to be grateful." She leaned against the doorframe. "Do you know what it's like to be 53 years old and have your 24-year-old daughter pay for your heart surgery?" I thought. It felt like being alive. It feels like being a failure. That's not how I see it. No, I'm sure it's not. You see it as being generous, noble, the good daughter who steps up when her mother needs help. Her voice carried an edge I recognized from my childhood. But I see it as another reminder that I never figured out how to take care of myself. That I'm the kind of person who needs to be rescued by her child. Everyone needs help sometimes. Some people do. I've needed help my entire life. First from your father, then from welfare, then from whatever minimum wage job would have me, and now from you. She shook her head. It never ends. I don't see it that way. I know you don't. That's what makes it worse. I stood there holding the bag of groceries, feeling like I was 12 years old again and being scolded for something I didn't understand. "I love you," I said finally. "I know you do." That's the problem. She closed the door, leaving me standing on our landing with a bag of food and the growing realization that Zia had been right. Saving my mother's life hadn't changed anything between us. If anything, it had made our relationship more complicated, adding another layer of resentment to the wall that had been building between us for years. I left the groceries by her door and drove home through the Sacramento evening, watching the sun set behind the valley's flat horizon. My phone was silent. No thank you text, no acknowledgement of the groceries, no sign that my mother understood what I was trying to give her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed listening to the sounds of our apartment building, footsteps in the hallway, muffled television, the distant hum of the freeway. Somewhere in the darkness, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been refusing to acknowledge. My mother was never going to love me the way I needed her to. No amount of money, no grand gestures, no sacrifices would ever be enough to earn the uncomplicated affection I'd been chasing my entire life. It was a terrible realization, but also strangely liberating. Because once you stop hoping for something that will never come, you can finally start figuring out what you actually need. The first sign that something had shifted came 3 days later, when my phone rang at 7 in the morning. I was barely awake, fumbling for the device in the pre-dawn darkness of my bedroom. "Celine?" It was Aunt Fiona, and she sounded upset. "I need to talk to you about your mother." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sat up in bed, immediately alert. Is she okay? Did something happen with her recovery? No, nothing like that. She's healing fine. It's just ... Fiona paused and I could hear her struggling with whatever she wanted to say. I had lunch with her yesterday and she said, some things that bother me. What kind of things? About you, about the surgery money. Another pause. Selene, honey, you know I love your mother, but sometimes she says things that just aren't fair. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What did she say? She told me that you only paid for this surgery to make yourself look good. That you did it so you could lord it over her, make her feel like she owed you something. Fiona's voice was strained. She said you've always been manipulative like that, even as a child. I closed my eyes, feeling something inside me crack. It was one thing for my mother to be ungrateful to my face. It was another thing entirely for her to be spreading poison about my motives to other family members. She said that? I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I told her she was being unfair, that what you did was beautiful and selfless, but she just got angrier. Said I didn't understand because I never had children, never had to deal with a child who used guilt as a weapon. I wanted to hang up the phone. I wanted to pretend this conversation wasn't happening. Instead, I asked, what else did she say? She said you've been sending her money for years without asking, and that it was just another way to control her, to make her feel like she couldn't make it on her own. Fiona was crying now. Selene, I know that's not true. I know you were just trying to help. Did she say anything else? She said ... Fiona's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She said that you reminded her of your father. That you both had this way of making her feel small by being generous. The mention of my father hit me like a physical blow. He died in a car accident when I was 15, and in the years since, my mother had constructed an elaborate mythology around his failures as a husband and father. According to her version of events, he'd been controlling, manipulative, always using his kindness as a weapon to make her feel inadequate. I never believed those stories because they didn't match my memories of him. My father had been gentle, patient, the kind of man who noticed when someone needed help and offered it without fanfare. But hearing his name weaponized against me now, I suddenly understood something that had been nagging at the edges of my consciousness for years. My mother didn't just dislike receiving help. She resented the people who offered it because their ability to give highlighted her need to receive. And rather than examine her own feelings of inadequacy, she chose to reframe generosity as manipulation, kindness as control. Fiona, I said carefully, thank you for telling me. I'm sorry, honey. I just thought you should know. After she hung up, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Outside, Sacramento was waking up. I could hear the distant sounds of traffic, the neighbor's dog barking, the rhythmic thump of someone going for an early run. Normal life continuing while my understanding of my family rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. I got up, made coffee, and called in sick to work. Then I did something I'd never done before. I started researching my mother's behavior patterns online. What I found was illuminating and heartbreaking in equal measure. Articles about narcissistic family dynamics, about emotional manipulation, about parents who teach their children to associate love with guilt. I read about triangulation, the practice of involving third parties in conflicts to avoid direct confrontation. I read about victim mentality, about people who maintain their sense of self-worth by casting themselves as perpetually wronged by others. Most painfully, I read about parentification, the process by which children are forced to take on adult responsibilities and emotional caretaking roles. How some parents unconsciously train their children to be perpetual rescuers, then resent them for succeeding in that role. By the time Zia came home from work that evening, I'd assembled a devastating psychological profile of my family dynamics. I could trace patterns that went back to my earliest memories, the way my mother had always made me responsible for her emotional state, the way she'd taught me to read her moods and adjust my behavior accordingly, the way she'd simultaneously demanded my care and punished me for providing it. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Zia said, dropping her bag by the door. "Worse, I've seen the truth." I told her about Fianna's call, about the research I'd been doing, about the patterns I was finally able to name. "Jesus," Zia said when I finished. "That's fucked up, even for your family. The worst part is, I think she actually believes what she's saying. I don't think she's lying when she tells people I'm manipulative. I think she's genuinely convinced that my kindness is an attack on her. So, what are you going to do?" It was a good question. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel the automatic urge to try to fix things with my mother, to find some way to make her understand my intentions. Instead, I felt something like relief, because finally understanding the game meant I could stop playing it. "I'm going to stop," I said. "Stop what?" "All of it. The money transfers, the grocery deliveries, the worrying about her bills. I'm going to stop trying to take care of someone who sees my care as an act of aggression." Zia looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I've been enabling this dynamic for years without realizing it. Every time I've helped her, I've confirmed her belief that she can't take care of herself. And every time she's accepted my help while resenting me for offering it, she's reinforced my belief that love has to be earned through sacrifice." That's very mature of you. It doesn't feel mature. It feels terrifying. The truth was, I had no idea how to have a relationship with my mother that wasn't built on my attempts to rescue her. For as long as I could remember, caretaking had been my primary way of expressing love. If I stopped trying to fix her problems, what would be left between us? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, my mother called me for the first time since her discharge from the hospital. "Celine, I need a favor." No greeting, no inquiry about my well-being, no acknowledgement of our last awkward conversation. Just straight to the request. "What kind of favor?" "My refrigerator is making a weird noise, and my landlord says it's not his problem. I need someone to look at it, maybe call a repair service." In the past, I would have immediately offered to research repair services, to call, then myself probably to pay for whatever fix was needed. Instead, I heard myself saying, "That sounds frustrating. I hope you're able to figure it out." There was a pause. "I'm asking you to help me figure it out. I heard you. But I'm not available to manage appliance repairs for you right now." "What? Do you mean you're not available? You work from home." "I mean, I'm not available to take care of your household problems anymore." Another pause, longer this time. "Is this about money? Because I told you I didn't want you paying for things." "It's not about money. It's about boundaries." "Boundaries?" She said the word like it tasted bad. What's that supposed to mean? "It means I'm not going to be your emergency contact for every minor crisis anymore. You're a capable adult. You can handle your own refrigerator repair." "I see." Her voice had turned cold. "So now that you've played the hero and paid for my surgery, you're cutting me off from everything else." "Mom, that's not what this is about, isn't it? You make this grand gesture, pay for my heart surgery, make sure everyone knows how generous you are. And now you're pulling back, making me feel guilty for asking for help with anything else." I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the urge to explain myself, to justify my decision. But for the first time, I also felt something else. Clarity. You know what? I said. You're right. I did pay for your surgery to make myself feel good. I thought if I proved how much I loved you, you might finally love me back the way I needed you to. But that was my mistake, not yours. Celine, I'm not cutting you off, Mom. But I'm also not going to keep trying to fix your life for you. If you want help with your refrigerator, call a repair service. If you want someone to talk to, call me. But I'm done being your unpaid personal assistant. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of finally saying what I'd been thinking for years. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the end of the evening, my mother had left 7 voicemails, each one escalating in tone from confusion to anger to something approaching hysteria. She accused me of abandoning her during her recovery, of being cruel and selfish, of turning into someone she didn't recognize. I don't know what those people you live with have been telling you, she said in the last message, but this isn't who you are, Celine. You're not the kind of person who turns your back on family. I listened to all 7 messages, then deleted them without calling her back. That night, I dreamed about my father for the first time in months. In the dream, we were sitting in his old truck, driving through the Sacramento Valley at sunset. He was younger than I remembered him, maybe in his early 30s, and he kept glancing over at me with concern. You okay, kiddo? He asked. I think. Mom hates me. Your mother doesn't hate you. She's just scared. Scared of what? Of needing people. Of not being enough on her own. He pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at me directly. But that's her fear to deal with, not yours to fix. I don't know how to stop trying to fix it. One day at a time, he said. One boundary at a time. I woke up feeling more peaceful than I had in weeks. My father had been dead for 9 years. But somehow his dream voice had managed to give me permission to stop carrying a burden that had never been mine to bear. The next morning, I changed my mother's contact information in my phone. Instead of Mom, I labeled it Callista Ivora. It was a small change, but it felt significant. She would always be my mother, but maybe she didn't have to be Mom, the person whose approval I'd spent my entire life chasing. The silence lasted exactly 5 days. On Wednesday evening, while I was reviewing a client's website mock-up, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see my brother Cairo standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit I hadn't seen Cairo in over a year. He was 30 now, working for some tech company in Portland, and he perfected the art of staying connected to the family just enough to avoid criticism, but not enough to actually be helpful. He was taller than me, with dark hair that he kept, meticulously styled, and our father's brown eyes, though they lacked the warmth I remembered from childhood. Selene! He smiled when I opened the door, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can I come in? What are you doing here? Mom called me, said you two were having some kind of fight. I stepped aside to let him in, noting how he glanced around our small apartment with barely concealed judgment. Cairo had always been good at making people feel like their lives were somehow insufficient compared to his. Want some coffee? I asked. Sure. Zia was working late, so we had the living room to ourselves. I made coffee in our little French press, while Cairo perched on the edge of our second-in couch like he was afraid it might stain his expensive clothes. So, he said when I handed him a mug, Mom's pretty upset. I'm sure she is. She said you hung up on her and won't return her calls. That's accurate. He studied my face, clearly trying to figure out what angle to take. Cairo had always been good at reading people, at saying what they wanted to hear. It was probably why he was successful in sales. Look, I know mom can be difficult. Difficult, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what we're calling it now? She told me you paid for her surgery. That was really generous of you. But that maybe. You're being a little harsh now, cutting her off when she's still recovering. I set down my coffee cup and looked at my brother directly. Cairo, when was the last time you talked to mom before she called you about this fight? He shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. A few months ago? Try 8 months. I know because I'm the one who's been fielding her complaints about how you never call, how you don't care about family. That's not fair. I'm busy with work. I'm not criticizing you for staying away. I'm criticizing you for showing up now to lecture me about family duty when you've been absent for years. That's different. How is it different? I've never pretended to be the good daughter. You have. You're the one who sends her money, who worries about her problems, who shows up for every crisis. You can't just suddenly stop being that person. Watch. Cairo leaned back on the couch, studying me with something that might have been respect. What happened to you? I grew up. Finally. Mom said you've been acting strange ever since the surgery. Like you're angry that she didn't thank you enough. Did she tell you what she said to Aunt Fiona about me? What do you mean? I told him? About Fiona's phone call, about my mother's accusations of manipulation, about the comparison to our father. As I spoke, I watched Kyra's expression shift from skepticism to recognition to something approaching anger. She said you were like Dad? He asked when I finished. Apparently, we're both manipulative people who use generosity as a weapon. Cairo was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, his face had changed in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. Do you know why I really moved to Portland? He asked. Your job. I could have found a job anywhere. I moved to Portland because it was far enough away that she couldn't make me feel guilty for not visiting more often. What do you mean? The last time I was home for more than a day, she spent the entire visit cataloging everything I'd missed by being away. Every holiday, every minor crisis, every opportunity to prove that I cared about her. By the time I left, I felt like the worst son in the world. He set down his mug. But you know what I realized after I got back to Portland? What? I didn't miss anything important. All those crises she wanted me to come home for, they weren't real emergencies. They were just ways to make me feel bad for having a life of my own. So why didn't you ever tell me that? Because you seemed to like being needed. And honestly, it made my life easier if you were handling all her emotional stuff. The admission hung between us like a confession. My brother had known for years that our mother's behavior was manipulative and emotionally damaging, but he'd allowed me to absorb all of it while he built a life for himself 3 states away. That's pretty fucked up, Cairo. I know, I'm sorry. He looked genuinely remorseful, but maybe this is good. Maybe it's time you started protecting yourself the way I did, by running away, by setting boundaries, by refusing to be responsible for her emotional well-being. He leaned forward. Celine, you've been trying to earn her love your entire life. Has it ever worked? No. Then maybe it's time to stop trying. After Cairo left, I sat in my empty apartment thinking about family loyalty and what it actually meant. I'd always assumed that love required sacrifice. That being a good daughter meant prioritizing my mother's needs over my own well-being. But watching my brother build a successful life by doing the exact opposite had forced me to question those assumptions. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I blocked my mother's phone number. It felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I knew that my phone wouldn't ring with some crisis that required my immediate attention. I wouldn't have to spend my evenings researching solutions to problems that weren't mine to solve, but the peace was. Short-lived. That weekend, Aunt Fiona showed up at my apartment, looking more distressed than I'd ever seen her. "Selene, honey, we need to talk." I let her in, already dreading whatever message she'd been sent to deliver. "Your mother is worried about you," Fiona said without preamble. "She thinks you're having some kind of breakdown." "I'm fine, Fiona. Are you?" "Because cutting off all contact with your mother doesn't seem fine. It seems cruel." I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the urge to explain myself, to justify my decision. But I was learning to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately trying to fix them. I haven't cut off all contact. I've just stopped being available for every minor crisis. She said you won't even talk to her on the phone. That's true. Selene, she's your mother. Whatever problems you two have, you can work them out. But the silence isn't helping anyone. It's helping me. Fiona looked shocked. How can you say that? Because for the first time in my adult life, I'm not spending every day worrying about her emotional state. I'm not checking my bank account to see if I can afford to help with her latest financial crisis. I'm not lying awake at night wondering if I've done enough to prove that I love her. But she needs you. No, she doesn't. She's a grown woman with a functioning brain and a social security check. She needs to learn how to manage her own life. That's not how family works. Says who? You? The woman who's never had children but somehow knows exactly how mother-daughter relationships should function. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. Fiona flinched. That's not fair. Neither is expecting me to sacrifice my mental health to maintain your idea of what family should look like. Your mother loves you, Selene. She's just not good at showing it. Loving someone and being good for them aren't the same thing. I can love my mother and still choose not to have her in my life if her presence is damaging to me. So you're just going to abandon her? I'm going to take care of myself for once. If that feels like abandonment to you, that says more about your expectations than my choices. After Fiona left, I felt shaky but resolute. The conversation had forced me to articulate something I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to name. Love wasn't enough. Love without respect, without healthy boundaries, without mutual consideration was just another form of abuse. That evening, I called my therapist and made an appointment for the first time in 6 months. Dr. Sarah Chun had been helping me navigate my family dynamics since college, and I suddenly felt ready to do the deeper work I'd been avoiding. I think I'm ready to stop trying to fix my relationship with my mother, I told her during our session the following week. What does that look like for you? It looks like accepting that she's never going to be the mother I need her to be. And that's not my fault, and it's not my responsibility to keep trying to change her. How does that feel? Sad, but also relieving. Dr. Chun nodded. Grief and relief often go together when we're letting go of relationships that weren't serving us. I feel guilty about the relief. That's normal. You've been trained to prioritize other people's needs over your own well-being. Learning to value your own mental health feels selfish at first. Is it selfish? Is it selfish to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others? I laughed to spite myself. Point taken. That night, I started writing in a journal for the first time since high school. I wrote about my father, about the memories I had of him that didn't match my mother's narratives. I wrote about the money I'd spent on the surgery and what I'd hoped it would accomplish. I wrote about the relief I felt when my phone stayed silent, when no one needed me to solve their problems or manage their emotions. Most importantly, I wrote. about the future I wanted to build for myself, a life that wasn't defined by crisis management and emotional caretaking, where my worth wasn't measured by how much I was willing to sacrifice for other people. For the first time in years, that future felt possible. 3 weeks into what I'd started thinking of as my no-contact experiment, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something about the timing late on a Thursday evening made me pick up. Is this Celine Ivora? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, but tired. Yes, this is Detective Maria Santos with Sacramento Police. I'm calling about your mother, Callista Ivora. She's been reported missing. The words hit me like ice water. Missing? What do you mean missing? When was the last time you spoke with your mother, Miss Ivora? About 3 weeks ago. Who reported her missing? Her landlord. Apparently, she hadn't paid October rent, which was unusual for her. When you went to check on her yesterday, there was no answer. Her car is still in the parking lot, but no one has seen her in several days. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Did you check the hospitals? That was our first step. She's not in any local medical facilities. We've also checked with relatives. Your Aunt Fiona said you might have more recent information. I don't. We haven't been in contact lately. I see. Is there anywhere your mother might go if she was upset or needed time away? Friends, other family members? I tried to think. My mother had never been social, had never maintained the kind of friendships that might offer refuge during a crisis. I don't think so. She doesn't really have close friends. What about your brother? We left messages but haven't heard back. Cairo lives in Portland. He's even less in touch with her than I am. There was a pause. Miss Ivora, I have to ask, was your mother experiencing any mental health issues? Depression, anxiety, anything that might explain a sudden departure? She's always been anxious, but she wouldn't just leave without telling anyone. That's not like her. People sometimes behave unpredictably when they're under stress. Had she been dealing with any major life changes recently? I thought about the surgery, about our fight, about the weeks of silence. She had heart surgery a month ago. She's been recovering. Any financial stress? Relationship problems? She didn't have much money, but that wasn't new. And she wasn't in a relationship. What about family conflicts? The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, make it seem like our relationship was normal, uncomplicated. Or I could tell the truth and risk having my family dynamics become part of a police investigation. We had a disagreement recently, I said finally, about boundaries. I've been helping her financially, and I decided to stop. How did she react? To that, she was angry. She left several voicemails, but I didn't return her calls. When was your last contact? 3 weeks ago. I blocked her number after that. Another pause, longer this time. I'm going to need you to come in and give a formal statement, Ms. Ivora, and I'll need access to those voicemails if you still have them. Do you think something happened to her? I think we need to explore all possibilities. Can you come in? Tomorrow morning? I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. My mother was dramatic, manipulative, prone to emotional outbursts, but she wasn't impulsive. She'd never done anything like disappear without warning. Despite all her problems, she was fundamentally a creature of routine. Someone who found comfort in predictability. The next morning, I sat in a sterile police station conference room, giving Detective Santos a detailed account of my relationship with my mother. I played the voicemails she'd left after our last. Conversations, 7 increasingly frantic messages that painted a picture of a woman spiraling into panic and rage. In the last message, Detective Santos noted, She mentions those people you live with. Do you know what she meant by that? My roommate, probably. My mother always thought Zia was a bad influence. Why? Zia grew up in foster care. She has strong opinions about family loyalty and obligation. My mother saw her as someone who was encouraging me to abandon family. Was she? I considered the question. She was encouraging me to prioritize my own mental health. To my mother, that was the same thing as abandonment. Detective Santos made notes on a legal pad. Tell me about the surgery payments. That was a significant amount of money for someone your age. $28,000. My entire savings. And your mother's reaction to that? She was ungrateful. Said I only did it to make myself look good, to feel superior to her. That must have been hurtful. It was. But it also opened my eyes to patterns that had been going on for years. What kind of patterns? I explained about the financial help I'd been providing, about my mother's habit of accepting assistance while resenting the people who offered it, about her tendency to reframe generosity as manipulation. So, when you decided to stop helping her financially, how did you communicate that decision? She called asking for help with a refrigerator repair. I told her I wasn't available to manage her household problems anymore. How did she respond? She accused me of cutting her off after making a grand gesture with the surgery payment. Said I was making her feel guilty for asking for help. Detective Santos looked up from our notes. Ms. Ivora, I have to ask, do you think your mother might have hurt herself? The question I'd been avoiding crystallized in the sterile air of the conference room. I don't know. She was angry, but she was also fragile. The surgery took a lot out of her, physically and emotionally. Had she ever made threats of self-harm? Not directly, but she had a way of making people feel responsible for her emotional state. Like if something bad happened to her, it would be our fault for not doing enough. That's a form of emotional manipulation. Yes, but knowing that doesn't make it less effective. After giving my statement, I drove home in a fog of guilt and confusion. I'd spent 3 weeks feeling proud of myself for setting boundaries, for refusing to be manipulated by my mother's crises. Now she was missing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my withdrawal had somehow contributed to whatever had happened to her. Zia found me that evening sitting on our couch, staring at my phone. Any news? She asked. Nothing. The police are treating it as a missing person case, but they don't have any leads. What do you think happened? I don't know. Part of me wonders if she just left, packed up and moved somewhere else without telling anyone. Would she do that? I wouldn't have thought so. But then again, I wouldn't have thought she'd go missing either. Zia sat down beside me. You know, this isn't your fault, right? Is it not? I blocked her number, Zia. I refused to talk to her. What if she was reaching out for help and I wasn't available? What if she was reaching out to manipulate you again? What if this is just another crisis designed to pull you back into taking care of her problems? She's missing, Zia. This isn't manipulation, it's a police investigation. Maybe she's staying with someone you don't know about, letting you worry while she figures out her next move. I wanted to believe that was possible, but it didn't feel right. My mother was many things manipulative, emotionally unstable, prone to dramatic gestures, but she wasn't strategic enough to stage her own disappearance. Her manipulations were always immediate, reactive, designed to get instant attention and sympathy. That night, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I unblocked my mother's number and called her phone. It went straight to voicemail, not the carefully recorded message I remembered, but the generic automated response that meant the phone was either dead or turned off. Mom, I said after the beep, feeling ridiculous for leaving a message for someone who was missing. I don't know where you are, but I'm worried about you. Please call me back. Or call the police. Or call anyone. We just need to know you're okay. I hung up and immediately felt foolish. If she was missing because something bad had happened to her, she wouldn't be getting voicemails. If she was missing by choice, she probably wouldn't be impressed by my sudden concern. The next morning, Detective Santos called with an update. "We found your mother's purse," she said without preamble. "Where?" "In a dumpster behind a grocery store about 2 miles from her apartment. Her wallet was still inside, along with her keys and medication." My stomach dropped. Her medication? Heart pills. The prescription bottle was full. She hadn't been taking them. What does that mean? It means she's been without her cardiac medication for at least several days. Given her recent surgery, that could be dangerous. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of guilt settle over me like a blanket. "Detective Santos, what are the chances that she left voluntarily? Honestly, lower than they were yesterday. People don't usually throw away their medication and education if they're planning to start a new life somewhere else. So what's the next step? We're expanding the search. Checking surveillance footage from the area where her purse was found, interviewing neighbors and local business owners. We've also issued a broader missing person alert. Is there anything I can do? Keep your phone on. If she contacts you, call us immediately. And Ms. Ivora? Yes. Try not to blame yourself. Family relationships are complicated, but you're not responsible for your mother's choices." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the morning light streaming through our small window. 3 weeks ago, I felt strong and empowered, finally free from the emotional manipulation that had defined my relationship with my mother for years. Now she was missing, possibly hurt, definitely without the medication that was keeping her alive. And I was the daughter who had cut off contact just when she might have needed help the most. The irony was devastating. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to save my mother from her various crises, real and imagined. The one time I'd step back, the one time I'd refused to rush to her rescue. An actual crisis had emerged. I called in sick to work and spent the day driving around Sacramento, checking parks and coffee shops and libraries, anywhere my mother might have gone if she'd been confused or disoriented. I showed her photo to homeless shelter workers and hospital security guards, to anyone who might have seen a 53-year-old woman acting strangely dot by evening. I was exhausted and no closer to finding her. I came home to find Zia waiting, with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. "Any luck?" she asked. "Nothing. It's like she just vanished." "The police will find her." What if they find her too late? What if she's been without her medication too long? Selene, you can't think like that. Why not? It might be true. Dia poured wine into 2 glasses and handed me one. Okay, let's say the worst has happened. Let's say your mother is dead, and it's somehow connected to your decision to stop taking care of her. What then? What do you mean, what then? I mean, would you go back? Would you go back to the way things were before, letting her manipulate? You emptying your bank account for her crises, sacrificing your mental health to manage her emotions? I stared at her, shocked by the bluntness of the question. Because that's what this is really about, Zia continued. You're not just worried about your mother's safety. You're worried that setting boundaries makes you a bad person. That choosing yourself over her needs makes you responsible for whatever happens to her, doesn't it? No, it makes you a person with limits. It makes you someone who finally learned that you can't save people who don't want to be saved. I drank my wine and considered her words. She was right, but knowing that didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. For 24 years, I'd been trained to believe that my worth was measured by my willingness to sacrifice for others. 3 weeks of freedom hadn't been enough to reprogram that fundamental belief about myself, but maybe, regardless of what had happened to my mother, it was time to start trying. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I knew because I was staring at my phone when it rang. Having been awake since 4 a.m. thinking about my mother's medication and how long someone could survive after major heart surgery without proper treatment. Ms. Ivora, this is Detective Santos. We found your mother. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. Is she alive? She's alive. She's in the hospital Sacramento General. She was found early this morning in Cesar Chavez Park, unconscious but breathing. She's stable now, but you should come in. What happened to her? We're still piecing that together. She appears to have been living outdoors for several days. Dehydration, exposure, and she hadn't been taking her medication. But she's going to be okay. I was already pulling on clothes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the hospital felt like a repetition of the nightmare that had started this whole ordeal. Rushing through Sacramento traffic to see my mother in a medical crisis. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't driven by the desperate hope that my sacrifice would finally earn her love. I was driven by simple human concern and a complicated tangle of guilt. I found her in the emergency department, connected to monitors and IV lines looking smaller and more fragile than she had even after the surgery. Her hair was matted, her clothes dirty, and she had what looked like a rash on her arms from sleeping outdoors. Mom? I approached her bed carefully. She opened her eyes, and for a moment, I saw something I'd rarely seen in them before. Genuine vulnerability. Not the performed fragility she used to manipulate sympathy, but actual fear and confusion. Selene. Her voice was hoarse. You came. Of course I came. How are you feeling? Tired? Confused? She struggled to sit up slightly. They said I was in the park for 3 days. I don't remember all of it. A doctor appeared at my elbow, a young resident who looked like he'd been working for 36 hours straight. Are you family? He asked. I'm her daughter. Dr. Martinez. Your mother is stable, but she's been through a significant ordeal. Dehydration, mild hypothermia, and she hasn't been taking her cardiac medication. We're getting her rehydrated and back on her heart regimen, but she needs to stay for observation for at least 48 hours. Was she ... did someone hurt? Her? No signs of physical trauma. This appears to have been voluntary exposure to the elements, but we've asked for a psychiatric consultation, given the circumstances. I thanked him and turned back to my mother, who was watching our conversation, with alert but tired eyes. Mom, what happened? Why were you in the park? I don't know. She closed her eyes. I remember being angry. I remember leaving my apartment, but I don't remember deciding to live outside. You've been missing for 5 days. People were looking for you. I didn't mean to worry anyone. Your purse was found in a dumpster. Your medication, your ID, everything. She was quiet for a long moment. I threw it away. Why? Because I was angry. Because I felt like ... She paused, struggling for words. Like if no one cared whether I lived or died, then maybe I should just disappear. The statement hung between us like a confession. I wanted to argue with her too. Point out all the people who had been worried about her, who had been looking for her. But I also understood with terrible clarity what she meant. Mom, people do care. Do they? You blocked my phone number? Cairo hasn't called in months. Even Fiona only checks on me when she needs something to worry about. That's not true, isn't it? She looked at me directly. When was the last time someone in this family called me just to see how I was doing? Not because they needed something, not because someone told them they should, but because they actually wanted to talk to me. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. Every interaction I'd had with my mother in the past year had been either crisis-driven or obligation-driven. I'd sent money, groceries, brief courtesy calls on holidays. But when was the last time I called her simply because I enjoyed talking to her? I paid for your surgery because I love you, I said finally. I know, but you also resented me for needing it. And you resented me even more for not being grateful enough. That's not, I started, then stopped, because it was true. I had resented her for not thanking me the way I'd wanted to be thanked. I'd expected gratitude that would validate my sacrifice and make me feel like a good daughter. You're right. I said, I did resent that. She looked surprised. In all our years of fighting, I never simply agreed with one of her criticisms. I wanted you to be grateful because I wanted to feel good about myself. I wanted to feel like I was the kind of person who saves her mother's life, who makes sacrifices without expecting anything in return. But I did expect something in return. I expected you to love me differently because of it. Selene, and when you didn't, when you saw my generosity as manipulation instead of love, I got angry. I cut you off. I decided that if you couldn't appreciate my help, you didn't deserve it. She was crying now, silent tears that made her look even more fragile. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For being the kind of mother who makes her children feel like their love isn't enough. For being so scared of being a burden that I turned every kindness into an attack on my independence. I reached for her hand, surprised by how small it felt in mine. Mom, I need to tell you something. The last few weeks, when we weren't talking, I've been happier than I've been in years. She flinched, but I continued. Not because I don't love you, but because I finally stopped trying to earn your love. I stopped checking my phone constantly, worried about your latest crisis. I stopped lying awake, wondering if I'd done enough to prove I cared. That must have been nice. It was. But it was also terrifying because I didn't know how to love you without trying to fix you. I didn't know how to be your daughter without being your caretaker. I never asked you to take care of me. Yes, you did. Not directly, but you did. Every crisis became my emergency. Every financial problem became my responsibility to solve. Every emotional breakdown became my failure to prevent. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the emergency room. Your father used to say I had a talent for making people feel guilty for caring about me, she said finally. Dad said that? Not in a mean way, but he noticed that I had trouble accepting help without feeling diminished by it. That I preferred to struggle alone rather than admit I needed support. Is that why you threw away your medication? I think. I wanted to punish everyone who had stopped caring, including myself. I squeezed her hand. We can't keep doing this, Mom. This cycle where you need help, I provide it, you resent me for providing it. And then we both feel terrible about ourselves. I know. I want to have a relationship with you, but not if it means I have to sacrifice my mental health to manage your emotions. What does that look like? I don't know yet. Maybe therapy for both of us. Maybe family counseling. Maybe just learning how to talk to each other without keeping score of who's done more or sacrificed. More loves more. I'd like that. It's going to mean accepting that I can't fix your problems for you. And it's going to mean me accepting that I can't earn your love by trying to. You don't have to earn my love, Selene. You've always had it. I've just been really bad at showing it in ways that felt good to you. A nurse appeared to check my mother's vitals, and I stepped back to give her room to work. Through the window, I could see the Sacramento skyline in the distance, the same view I'd grown up with, the same landmarks that had oriented my entire life. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing them from a different angle. When the nurse left, my mother looked at me with something that might have been hope. "Will you stay?" she asked. "For a while." "But Mom?" "I know. Things have to be different." "They do." "I don't know how to be different." "Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, her face looked peaceful. I sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair and watched her sleep, thinking about boundaries and love and the difference between saving someone and supporting them. Outside, Sacramento continued its daily routine, people going to work, children playing in parks, families navigating their own complicated relationships. And somewhere in that ordinary chaos, I began to imagine a future where my mother and I could love each other without it costing us everything. The psychiatric evaluation took place on Sunday afternoon in a small, windowless room that smelled like disinfectant and industrial coffee. I sat in on the session at my mother's request, watching her field questions from Dr. Patricia Huang, a psychiatrist who specialized in post-surgical depression and family dynamics. "Mrs. Ivora, can you tell me what was going through your mind when you decided to throw away your medication and identification?" Dr. Huang's voice was calm, professional. Without judgment, my mother sat on the edge of the hospital bed, wearing a clean gown and looking more alert than she had since being found. The 4 fluids and cardiac medication had restored some color to her face, but her eyes still held the hollow quality of someone who had touched bottom. "I felt invisible," she said, "like I could disappear and no one would notice for weeks. But you had family members who were looking for you. Your daughter paid for life-saving surgery just a month ago." "I know, but that felt like obligation, not love. Like she did it because she had to, not because she wanted to." I started to object, but Dr. Wong held up a subtle hand. What would love have looked like to you in that situation?" My mother was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I think that's the problem. I've spent so many years being angry about not getting what I needed that I never figured out what I actually needed." "Can you think of a time when you felt truly loved by your family?" Another long pause. "When Selene was little, maybe 8 or 9, she used to leave me these notes. Little drawings with messages like, 'I love you,' 'Mom,' or 'You're the best.' She'd hide them in my purse, in my coat pockets, in places where I'd find them during my day." I remembered those notes. I'd forgotten about them completely until she mentioned them now. "I kept every single one," she continued. "I have a shoebox full of them in my closet. They never asked for anything or tried to fix any of my problems. They just said that I mattered to someone. What changed?" "Life, I guess." Her father died, money got tight, everything became about survival instead of connection. And somewhere along the way, love started feeling like a transaction. People did things for me when I was struggling, and I felt like I owed them something in return." Dr. Huang looked at me. "Selene, how does it feel to hear your mother talk about your childhood expressions of love?" "Sad," I said honestly. "Because I remember feeling that way about her, like she was the most important person in the world, and I just wanted her to know that. But I also remember when that changed, when love started feeling conditional and complicated. When did that shift happen for you?" "After Dad died. Suddenly everything I did was either helpful or not helpful, supportive or burdensome. There wasn't room for just loving each other without it meaning something about how good or bad we were as people." "Mrs. Ivora, how does it feel to hear Selene describe that shift?" My mother was crying again, but quietly. "Like, I took something beautiful and broke it because I was scared. Scared of what? Of being a burden, of not being enough, of needing help from my own child. She looked at me directly. When your father died, I felt like such a failure. Like I should have been able to provide for you and your brother without anyone's help. And every time you tried to take care of me, it reminded me that I wasn't strong enough to take care of myself. So you pushed her away to protect your own sense of competence? I guess so. But I also punished her for caring, which doesn't make any sense. Dr. Huang made notes on our pad. It makes perfect sense if you understand that accepting care felt like admitting failure. If someone helps you and you feel like that means you're incompetent, then the person helping you becomes a threat to your self-worth. But that's crazy, my mother said. It's human. We all develop coping mechanisms to protect ourselves from feeling inadequate. Some people become hyper-independent to avoid needing help. Others become dependent to avoid responsibility. Neither approach leads to healthy relationships. So, what do? I asked. You learn to separate love from function. Love doesn't have to be expressed through caregiving, and receiving help doesn't have to threaten your sense of self-worth. Dr. Huang looked between us. Mrs. Ivora, you're going to need ongoing support as you recover from this episode. But that support doesn't have to come primarily from your daughter. And Celine, you're going to need to learn how to love your mother without trying to fix her life. How do we do that? Practice. Therapy, both individual and family. Learning to communicate about feelings without making them anyone's responsibility to manage. She closed her notebook. But first, Mrs. Ivora, I need to ask, are you still having thoughts of harming yourself or disappearing? No, I think I scared myself more than anyone else. I don't want to die. I just didn't know how to live with feeling so disconnected from everyone. That's something we can work on. But you'll need to commit to regular therapy sessions and to taking your medication consistently. I will. After Dr. Huang left, my mother and I sat in awkward silence for a few minutes. The weight of everything that had been said hung between us like a bridge we weren't sure how to cross. Mom, I said finally, I want to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Okay. Do you actually want me in your life? Not because I can help you or because family members are supposed to love each other, but because you enjoy my company and want to know what's happening in my world. She considered the question seriously. I don't know. I think I've been so focused on surviving and managing my own problems that I haven't thought about whether I genuinely enjoy anyone's company in a long time. That's honest. But I'd like to find out. I remember enjoying you when you were little. Maybe we could figure out how to enjoy each other as adults. I'd like that too, but it's going to mean some changes for both of us. Like what? Like me learning how to care about you without feeling responsible for your emotional state. And you learning how to share your problems without making them my problems to solve. That sounds hard. It does. But what we've been doing isn't working. And it almost killed you. She nodded slowly. Selene, can I ask you something? Sure. When you blocked my phone number, were you trying to punish me, or were you trying to protect yourself? Protect myself. I realized that our relationship was making me anxious and depressed all the time, that I was spending more energy managing your emotions than I was taking care of my own life. That must have been hard to admit. It was. Because I wanted to be the kind of person who could love you without it costing me anything. But love isn't supposed to cost everything. No, it's not. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the activity in the hallway through the open door. Nurses walking by, other families navigating their own crises, the ordinary drama of a hospital on a Sunday afternoon. What happens now? my mother asked. Now you focus on getting physically healthy. You take your medication, you go to therapy, you learn how to take care of yourself without feeling like it's a failure. And us? We start over. We figure out how to be mother and daughter without all the drama and guilt and obligation. Maybe we have dinner once a week and just talk about normal things. Maybe we find out if we actually like each other when we're not in crisis mode. I'd like that. Me too. That evening, I drove home through Sacramento as the sun was setting behind the Coast Range. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Not the hollow relief of escape, but the deeper satisfaction of finally understanding something. Important out my mother and I would probably never have an easy relationship. We'd hurt each other too much, developed too many defensive patterns, learned too many ways to misinterpret each other's attempts at love. But maybe we could have an honest relationship. Maybe we could learn to love each other without trying. To save each other. When I got home, Zia was waiting with takeout pizza and a bottle of beer. "How is she?" she asked. "Alive, complicated, human. And how are you?" Relieved, exhausted, ready to figure out what comes next. What has come next? I thought about that question as I ate pizza and watched the last light fade from our small apartment windows. What came next was the long, slow work of rebuilding a relationship on different terms. What came next was learning how to love without. Rescuing, how to care without controlling, how to be a daughter without sacrificing my own identity in the process. What came next was the rest of my life. Finally free from the obligation to earn love through suffering. 6 months later, I was sitting in Dr. Chen's office for what would be our last regular session. The spring light coming through her windows felt different than it had during the dark weeks when my mother had been missing warmer, more hopeful, full of possibility rather than dread. "How are things with your mother now?" Dr. Chen asked. "Different. Better, but not easy." I considered how to explain this slow, careful reconstruction of our relationship. We have dinner every other Wednesday, and we talk on the phone once a week. Scheduled contact, which sounds weird, but it works for us. How does scheduled contact help? It means neither of us has to wonder when the other one is going to call with a crisis. And it means we both have to think of things to talk about that aren't problems that need solving. What do you talk about? Normal things. Her physical therapy sessions, my work projects. The neighbors in our apartment complex, books we've read. I smiled. Last week she told me about this community garden she's helping with. She's growing tomatoes. How does it feel to have normal conversations with her? Surprising. It turns out she's actually funny when she's not performing crisis. And she asks good questions about my life, not because she wants to fix anything, but because she's genuinely curious. Dr. Chen made a note. That's significant progress. It is, but it's also fragile. We're both still learning how to do this. What's the hardest part for me? Resisting the urge to jump in when she mentions a problem. She told me last week that her car was making a weird noise, and my first instinct was to offer to research mechanics and arrange for towing if she needed it. Instead, I just said, "That sounds frustrating. I hope you get it figured out." How did that feel? Terrifying and liberating at the same time. Terrifying because what if she can't handle it on her own? Liberating because it's not my job to handle it for her. And what happened with the car? She took it to a shop, got it fixed, paid for it. Herself. Turned out to be a minor issue. I laughed. Revolutionary concept, she solved her own problem. What about your mother? What's been hardest for her? Learning how to ask for emotional support without creating a crisis. She called me crying a few weeks ago because she was having a bad day, missing my dad. feeling lonely. In the past, that would have turned into this whole emergency where I'd have to drop everything and come over and fix her mood somehow. But this time I just listened. I said it sounded really hard that grief comes in waves, that feeling lonely didn't mean anything was wrong with her. And she said, thank you, and that she felt better just talking about it. That's a huge shift. It is. She's also been seeing Dr. Huang regularly, working on what she calls her catastrophic thinking patterns, learning how to have feelings without turning them into emergencies that other people need to solve. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. What about the financial boundaries you set? Still in place? She hasn't asked me for money once since she came home from the hospital. She applied for some assistance programs, found a part-time job at a bookstore, figured out how to manage on what she has. How do you feel about that? Proud of her. And relieved that I don't have to monitor her bank account balance in my head anymore. I paused, but also a little sad. Sad how? Sad that it took so long for both of us to figure out that she was more capable than either of us believed. Sad about all the years we wasted with me trying to rescue her and her resenting me for thinking she needed rescuing. That's natural grief for the relationship you might have had if you'd understood these dynamics earlier. Yeah, but I'm trying to focus on what we have now instead of mourning what we lost. What do you have now? I thought about our last dinner together, my mother telling me about the elderly man in our building who had asked her to help him write emails to his grandchildren, her excitement about the tomatoes she was growing, her questions about my work and whether I was happy. We have a friendship, I think. A careful, intentional friendship between two adults who happen to be related and who are learning how to care about each other without trying to fix each other. That sounds like a good foundation. It is. And if that's all we ever have, enough. I don't need her to be the mother I always wanted her to be. I just need her to be honest about who she actually is. What about the rest of your family? Cairo came to visit last month. First time he's been back to Sacramento in 2 years. He and Mom had dinner, just the two of them, and he said it was the first time he'd enjoyed her company since he was a kid. What changed? She didn't spend the entire evening cataloging our problems or making him feel guilty for living far away. She asked about his work, his girlfriend, his life in Portland. He said it felt like talking to a person instead of talking to a crisis. And your Aunt Fiona? She's struggling with the changes, honestly. She's been the family mediator for so long that she doesn't know what to do now that there's less drama to mediate. But she's adapting. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, reviewing her notes from our months of sessions. Selene, when you first came back to therapy 6 months ago, you said you wanted to stop trying to fix your relationship with your mother. Do you feel like you accomplished that? I did stop trying to fix it. But what I discovered was that once I stopped trying to fix it, we were able to build something new, something healthier. What do you think the key difference was? I stopped needing her to be grateful for my help, and she stopped needing to prove she didn't need help. Once we removed those competing needs, we could just focus on enjoying each other's company. That's remarkably mature for both of you. It almost killed her, learning this lesson. I don't think either of us wanted to go through that again. Dr. Chen closed her notebook. What are your goals now? To keep building this new relationship slowly and carefully. To remember that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. To trust that my mother can handle her own life without my management. And for yourself? To keep remembering that I'm allowed. To prioritize my own well-being. That setting boundaries doesn't make me a bad person. That I can love my family without sacrificing my mental health. Those are good goals. As I left Dr. Chen's office for the last time, I felt something I never expected to feel about my family. Optimism. Not the desperate hope that had driven me to empty my savings account for my mother's surgery, but a quiet confidence that we were finally learning how to love each other in ways that actually worked. That evening, my phone rang at exactly 7 p.m., our scheduled weekly call. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, honey. How was your day?" We talked for 30 minutes about ordinary things, her progress with the community garden, my latest client project, a book we'd both read, plans for Kara's next visit. No crises, no guilt, no hidden agendas. Just two people who cared about each other sharing the details of their separate but connected lives. When we hung up, I realized that this was what I'd been searching for my entire life, a relationship with my mother that felt like love instead of obligation, connection instead of crisis management. It had taken 24 years, a near-death experience, and more therapy than I cared to calculate. But we'd finally figured out how to be family without it costing us everything. Outside my apartment window, Sacramento hummed with its usual evening activity, people cooking dinner, walking dogs, living their ordinary, complicated lives. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of that normalcy instead of constantly managing someone else's crisis. Opened my laptop and started working on a project I'd been thinking about for months, a freelance website for adult children of difficult parents, offering resources for setting boundaries and rebuilding relationships on healthier terms. At the top of the page, I typed, "Love doesn't have to hurt to be real." It felt like the truest thing I'd ever written. It's been a year since my mother disappeared into that park. A year since I sat beside her hospital bed and said aloud the things we'd both been trying so hard not to admit. A year since I realized that saving someone and loving them aren't the same thing. In the beginning, the changes felt fragile, like saplings struggling to take root in the same dry, stubborn ground where old patterns had grown thick and thorny. I half expected them to wither overnight, starved by our shared habits of guilt and obligation. But somehow, with cautious tending, they survived. So did we. I moved apartments that spring. Zia and I found a bigger place closer to the river. Second bedroom that I turned into a home office with an actual door I could close at the end of the day. I painted the walls a warm, optimistic yellow. Sometimes when the light hits just right, it looks like late afternoon sunshine all day long. My mother hasn't been inside yet. That's not an accident. Our new boundaries are visible in the smallest details. When she visits, we meet at a cafe near her building, or we take a slow walk through the community garden she's joined. She likes to show off her tomatoes and the lavender she coaxed into bloom. We stand together in that patch of borrowed soil and talk about nothing urgent. The weather, a recipe she's trying, a neighbor's noisy dog. There are still moments when her old reflexes show up, like when she hints at money troubles in that tight, sideways way she used to use to test my willingness to offer. But now I don't rush to fill the silence. I listen, I nod, remind her of the resources she can access. Sometimes she gets annoyed. Sometimes she gets proud and changes the subject herself. It's awkward and human, and for us, honest. Sometimes I still feel that familiar tug and echo of the little girl who wanted to be good enough to fix everything. But now I catch it mid-pull and place it gently back where it belongs. My therapist says that's progress. I say it's freedom. Cairo calls more often these days. He likes to check in on Mom, but on his own terms. He doesn't let her drag him into guilt about the distance. Doesn't let her rewrite his absence as betrayal. He and I talk too, more than we ever did when we were kids tiptoeing around the landmines of her moods. It turns out we have more in common than I thought. We know exactly how to read each other's silences, the way survivors do. Last month, for the first time since Dad died, We all sat down to dinner together, Mom, Caro, Fiona, and me. No drama, no accusations simmering under the surface. Just a simple meal of roasted chicken and bread Fiona made from scratch. Mom even really laughed when Cairo told a story about his clueless boss who can't remember anyone's name. It wasn't perfect. It didn't fix everything, but for once, I didn't need it to. Afterwards, when Fiona pulled me aside to say how proud she was of me, of us, I didn't shrink away from her praise. I let it land. I let it mean what it meant. No bigger or smaller than that dot sometimes. I wonder what Dad would think if he could see us now, each of us holding our own pieces of love and pain without forcing them into someone else's hands. I like to imagine him proud too, wherever he is. Maybe sitting in his old truck on some cosmic highway, nodding to himself because his daughter finally understood what he tried to teach me years ago, that you can care for someone without losing yourself inside their storms. I go back to that dream sometimes, the one where he pulls over on an empty road and tells me I don't have to fix it all. I wake up lighter every time, like I'm still learning how to believe him. Maybe I always will be, but that's okay. Some roots take longer to deepen than others. Healing, I've discovered, isn't a finish line you cross on a bright morning with confetti falling around you. It's more like gardening, pulling the same weeds over and over, learning what to prune, and what still deserves water even when it hasn't bloomed yet. Some days it feels almost natural. Like when Mom calls just to ask how my week was instead of starting with a litany of what went wrong. Her voice still catches sometimes, like she's trying to remember the script for being a mother without turning into a martyr. And when it does, I wait. I don't rush in to complete the sentence for her. Other days, the old instincts show up before I notice. When her voice trembles, my chest tightens and my mind leaps ahead, calculating bank balances and free hours in my schedule, but I'm quicker now to catch that spiral. Quicker to breathe, to remind myself, I'm not responsible for her peace. It still surprises me how new that feels. She's kept her promise about therapy, though she doesn't talk about it much. At first, she framed it as something the doctors made her do, the way you grumble about taking a daily pill. But slowly, almost without meaning to, she started mentioning things Dr. Huang said, little insights dropped into conversation like seeds. Apparently, I get defensive when I feel small, she told me once, almost sheepish. Who knew I knew? But I didn't say that. I just nodded and she nodded back. And that small agreement felt bigger than any apology we'd never spoken. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the mother I remember from before Dad died, her humor dry and biting in a way that used to make me laugh, until my stomach hurt. The quick cleverness that made crosswords disappear in minutes. The tenderness she had when I was sick as a child, when her fear outshone her pride. They're only glimpses, but they're enough to remind me she's not only her worst patterns. Just like I'm not only my oldest wounds. In therapy, Dr. Chun asked me once what I'd do if Mom slipped back completely, if the walls of blame and guilt returned, thicker than before. I told her the truth. I'd be heartbroken, but I wouldn't lose myself again. I've built too much of a life outside of her now, and it really is a life. My client list has grown enough that I finally left my part-time job and took the risk of freelancing full-time. Zia and I celebrated with cheap champagne and tacos on the living room floor, like we used to in college when we'd pass finals. I still catch myself wanting to call Mom first with the news, the way other daughters might. But then I remember it's safer, kinder, even to let some things stay mine until the excitement settles into something steadier. Mom does know, though. I told her after a few weeks, in a conversation that didn't start or end with crisis. She said, "That's wonderful, Celine," and I believed her. Not because her voice rang with pride or because she promised to brag to her neighbors, but because it was simple. Uncomplicated. Fiona visits more too. We're still learning what it means to be family when we're not gathered around an emergency. She bakes bread and tells stories about her own youth, stories I never heard because there had never been time to tell them. Sometimes I listen and realize how little I knew about her outside her role as peacemaker between Mom and Me. Cairo comes down once a month. We meet for coffee, just the two of us. It turns out he doesn't remember our childhood exactly the way I do. We compare memories and see different shadows in the same corners. But there's comfort in speaking openly at last, in sharing guilt and relief without trying to outdo each other's scars. What healing looks like, I've learned, isn't perfect days or perfectly mended relationships. It's knowing I can walk away from old patterns without shutting the door on the people inside them. It's learning that I can love my mother and still say no. That I can love myself and say yes to things she never understand. And most, surprising of all, it's realizing that the distance I created wasn't a sign of failure, but the first real thing I ever built entirely for myself. Last week, Mom and I sat together on a bench in the community garden, the late afternoon sun warm on our backs and the air heavy with the smell of earth and rosemary. She showed me the tomatoes she's growing, small, green, stubborn things, clinging to life despite an early frost. They're behind, she said, frowning. But maybe they'll catch up. For once, I didn't rush to reassure her that they would. Instead, I just looked at them and nodded. Maybe, I said. And that was enough. It felt strange. How natural it was not to force hope into the silence. How much more honest it felt to sit beside her in uncertainty rather than trying to drag her and the tomatoes toward a happy ending. After a while, she cleared her throat, her hands still dusted with soil. I used to think love meant doing everything, she said, holding on so tight that nothing bad could get in. But it turns out you can't love anyone if your own fists are clenched all the time. I used to think love meant saving someone. I told her that if I didn't fix every problem, it meant I didn't care enough. And now I think it means being there. Really being there, even when you can't fix it. She nodded, her eyes a little wet. That's harder, isn't it? Yeah, I said. But it feels better too. Later that evening, as I drove home through Sacramento's quiet streets, I thought about how far we've come. A year ago, our love had been sharp-edged, a currency we traded in guilt and obligation. Now it's softer, smaller, but somehow more real. It doesn't demand everything from us. It doesn't ask us to bleed just to prove we care. It isn't perfect. There are days when Mom's voice still carries the old weight, when I feel the reflex to fix, to reassure, to step in. But there's space now, a pause, a breath, a chance to choose differently. Cairo notices it too. You both sound lighter, he said recently after a phone call with Mom, like you've finally put something heavy down. And maybe we have. Maybe what we put down wasn't each other, but the story we've been carrying. That love was a debt and closeness a punishment. In its place, we're writing something new. Slower, gentler, honest enough to hurt sometimes, but also honest enough to heal. Zia sees the difference in me more than anyone. You don't flinch at your phone anymore, she told me last month. It's like you finally believe you get to choose when to pick it up. She's right. My mother's crises don't own my time or my mind anymore. When I call her, it's because I want to hear her voice, not because I'm bracing for what she need. And when I hang up, I go back to my own life without guilt's shadow following me around the apartment. Some days, I still wish we could have had this earlier, that Dad could have seen us like this, that younger me could have known love wasn't something she had to buy with obedience and sacrifice. But then I remember late is still better than never. And healing that starts late can still last. A few weeks ago, Mom texted me a photo of her tomatoes, finally turning red under the California sun. No caption, just the picture. And I found myself smiling not out of relief, not because it meant she was okay, but because she wanted to share something small and good. That's the relationship I want. One where we share our harvest, not just our famines. Where love is an offering, not an obligation. Maybe we'll never have the storybook ending I used to dream of. Maybe our history will always sit between us like an old scar. Faded, but still. There if you look closely. But scars don't have to define what comes next. They're just reminders that healing happened. And as for me, I'm learning to live outside the crisis. In the quiet, ordinary moments I used to rush past. The morning light in my yellow painted office. Dinner with friends who became family. Evenings where my phone stays silent, and that silence feels like peace. Not dread. This is a different kind of love than the one I chased for so long. It's smaller, humbler, more imperfect, but it's real. And it's ours. And for the first time, that feels like enough. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.